Hello and welcome to Get Out the Bet, the show with all you need to know about betting on politics. Now, if you're already betting on politics, you're probably in Europe somewhere where it is legal. But if you're in the US, it is not legal here yet, but there's no reason we can't talk about it. I'm your host, Melissa Caen. I'm a political analyst, and as always, I am here with Paul Krishnamurty from politicalgambler.com and Patrick Everson, senior reporter from VegasInsider. Today's show is a little off schedule because of Thanksgiving, but we did not want to leave you hanging with the Georgia runoff happening on Tuesday. So we're going to talk about that, but first we are going to talk about our market movers. That is the odds that have changed since last week. And Paul will start by telling us what's moving.
Okay, so the big event at the moment, pretty much dominating the political betting world, is the Georgia runoff, which is next week. And just a further continuation of the trends that we saw already, like Raphael Warnock is a really hot favourite now. 86% favourite, up from 80% when we last spoke about it. And we'll dig deeper into that later in the show. For 2024, which is the other big event, the one really dramatic move has involved Joe Biden. So you may remember last time I put him up at about 36% for the nominee, shot up to 50% about a week ago. But he's come back down to 43%, again, sort of showing that there is a real division of opinion about whether he'll run again or not. Other movers in that, pretty much the same trends. Desantis up 1%, 29%, Trump down 1% to 17% for president. Biden +1 at 18 for president. And those three, it's an interesting dynamic there because you can kind of project what the main odds for 2024 are going to be here. In short, what those odds are saying is if it's Trump v. Biden, it's 50-50. If it's Biden v. DeSantis, it's 70% to DeSantis, 30% to Biden. So very, really strong implication there in that. Which I think just reflects the negativity towards Trump more than anything else. I think Biden would be an outsider against anyone at the moment, but Trump is also very, very unpopular at the moment on the markets. And just obviously in connection to Biden's price, both Newsom and Harris have fallen a little bit for the nominee and for president. And finally, one new entrant in a really interesting market, which is the Republican vice presidential candidate, which is Elise Stefanik, has come in at 5%. So she's now about third or fourth in the betting there.
Right. So a couple of things. First, so Elise Stefanik, she's a congresswoman from upstate New York. She replaced Liz Cheney as the head of I think it's the House Republican Conference. Yes, the House Republican Conference. That's what it's called. She replaced Liz Cheney, and so she's sort of a bit in leadership. I'm not so sure about her, given that New York is pretty reliably blue, and they usually are looking to bring something along. But then again, Kamala Harris brought California, and that really wasn't something that we needed. We needed a representative in order to vote for Biden. So that they may break from the sort of conventional wisdom that you need to bring in somebody from a swing state as your VP, just like Joe Biden did. The other thing I want to point out is now that the Democrat, this is something to keep an eye on. So the Democratic Party is looking at, also Republicans, but for the Democrats, they're looking at changing up their primary schedule. And Biden, for one, who enjoyed a big bump from his support in South Carolina, is pushing to make South Carolina the first state to vote in the primaries, if not one of the first. And so those kind of moves can also increase the chances that he will be the nominee. So keep an eye on the moves that the parties are making to reschedule the primaries and what that will mean for the momentum of certain people who may be up for these nominations. And Patrick, what do you make of these moves? Do you see any bargains there for our bettors?
Well, first off, I think it's a great point you made about the potential primary schedule. That could be interesting. It's almost like, okay, we want to get an early win on the board to start putting some pressure on people to get out of the way in case anybody's thinking of being in the way. Although I don't think, and as we all discussed a couple of weeks ago, I don't think, as long as Biden's running, I don't think anybody will challenge that nomination on the Dem. I don't think he'll get primaried. I couldn't imagine that. But no, I think it's interesting. I think on that, bringing up Stefanik, Paul bringing up Stefanik as the potential VP nominee. To me, if I recall correctly, didn't like a week or two ago, Stefanik was one of the first out of the gate to come out in favor of Trump's candidacy. Is that right? I believe she did. So I think what the meat on the bone there would be that, Stefanik is less damaged goods than Carrie Lake. That's what I think. Trump's got to have somebody be his right-hand person if he's really going to pursue this. And so I think that's an interesting entry to the market that Paul pointed out, and very well may be because of Trump's status in the race at this point. But I also think, to the point that Paul made a few weeks ago, I think we all kind of, Melissa, I don't know if you feel this way. I know Paul and I feel this way. I don't think Trump gets to the finish line. I think that's why everybody else who's even thinking about running, especially DeSantis, should just stretch, as one of my favorite music artists, Morrissey, when he was with the Smiths, used to say, just stretch out and wait. Stretch out and wait. Because look what we've seen in just the last, couple of weeks. It's been a little bit chaotic in the Trump campaign, I would say. So I think everybody should just kind of breathe and see what happens with Trump over these next few months, because there may be a lot of, housekeeping done before you even have to get to the point where you have to debate or primary Donald Trump. So I think everybody should breathe a little bit, but I think the numbers are fascinating. I think the fact that Biden has come back a little bit is interesting as well. It's my opinion, and I'll state this later on in the podcast here, but I think there's something to be made, and Paul would be able to speak to it better. And like I said, we can touch more on this later in the podcast, but I think there's something to be made of a yes-no proposition. If there was a yes-no proposition in U.S. betting on Biden running, I would jump on the no. And I don't think it's because it's going to get primaried. I just feel like there's going to be value there at some point.
On the no for Biden.
Yes. That's just my opinion. I could be totally dead wrong, but I think there'd be value there where it would be worth a play.
Oh, you think that people would overestimate the chances of him running?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. Paul, what were you going to say?
Well, I mean, first of all, I can't possibly match bringing a Smith's song into this. It's just brilliant. No, that yes-no subject. I mean, this is the beauty of firms like Betfair and Predict It, that you can take either side of it. And I mean, that's what's going on with Biden right now. With, as I said, there was a big move for the yes, up to 50%. But then as soon as that hit, there was a resistance to it. It's come back to 43. And you could probably get the same thing with Trump. I'm sure that we could find some yes-no targets for Trump. Will Trump still make Iowa, for example? Right? And I think that's, it's a shame that Predict It is going, because it provides that. One other thing quickly, I'm really interested about what you said about the primary schedule, because that has enormous betting implications. It really does, because Iowa is always this spanner in the works, because it's certainly for the Democrats, it's not a state that they're likely to win at all in a general election. And yet it goes first. And you saw last time that Pete Buttigieg, who wasn't really taken very seriously as a candidate, wins that and then suddenly propels to the front. That squeezed other people out, like Klobuchar, who might have had a better chance otherwise, and Warren might have had a better chance otherwise. So that'll be really interesting to see what they do with that if they do alter the schedule.
That's right. And Republicans may be altering their schedule as well. So, I mean, just be aware. We've historically seen, to your point about Buttigieg, Jimmy Carter is very famously the candidate who, the headline was Jimmy who, and then he wins in Iowa, New Hampshire, and all of a sudden he's a player and he ends up winning. So these, getting this kind of early momentum is really critical for candidates and for pushing people out, especially if you're, say, a Republican and you want to make sure the field is cleared and not so muddled that Trump is able to, with his core group of supporters, able to pull off a win, because everyone else's vote is spread out. So if you really want to squeeze it down to just a few folks, you're going to be paying very close attention to that, to the schedule. And so one of the things that our bettors out there should be looking for is changes that are going to be coming soon to the party's primary schedules. So that will be happening. And actually, speaking of, you said Joe Biden might be an overestimation of his, propensity to run again. I'm curious if Herschel Walker might be being underestimated in the markets. As we move to our big race focus in Georgia, we've got, it looks like Warnock at 85% and Walker at 15%. And while I still think Warnock probably has the edge here, I wonder, is Walker undervalued here? Does he have a better chance than the markets are reflecting?
Well, look, I said at the start, I think that Warnock will win this comfortably by a considerable margin. The betting at the moment, there's various lines around in the global market for how much he'd win by, and the consensus seems around about 3.5%. We've only seen 2 A-grade polls, and I think, after one lesson of the midterms was that we should really siphon out the lesser polls, right? There are some quality polls where you generally get 98 to 100% declared one way or the other. Those ones had Warnock winning by 2 and 3%. I just think the key to it is going to be turnout as ever. I mean, Republicans aren't spending the money that Democrats are. Obama was there today campaigning, and Republicans aren't throwing anything like that into it. And I noticed that the Lieutenant Governor, Jeff Duncan, made some barbed comments yesterday, I think, in which he said, I queued up for an hour to vote, and at the end of it, I still couldn't bring myself to vote for Herschel Walker. Right now, he was already a Herschel Walker skeptic, so that was obviously deliberate, right? But I think that is the thing that the Republican Party hierarchy and in Georgia doesn't really want him. He's a liability to them. Now, of course, the chance that Walker would have would be that you would assume that the Libertarian candidate who got 2%, that his voters would probably swing in a majority to Walker. I think that's a bit of an assumption. I think if they weren't prepared to back him in what was a pretty much 50-50 race, would they now? And the fact that Warnock was already at 49.44 from the first round, it's not going to take much to get him up to 50.
Plus, would the Libertarians even turn out? I'm sorry. But
Yeah,
would the Libertarians even really turn out, to your point? Are they going to come out for this? I think no.
Well, so one of the polls that did come out today is a CNN poll showing Warnock up 4%. It's got a margin of error of about 3.6% or 3.8%. So it's not completely in the clear, but it is one of the few that we've actually seen be released to the public. And if you look down into the crosstabs, realclearpolitics.com will provide you with a crosstab. If you go and just sort of click on the link, they usually take you right there to the data, and that's where the good information is. And according to the crosstabs on that CNN poll, if you look at, and this is likely voters, about 2,000 likely voters, if you look at people who are independent, and so I don't want to confuse this too much with the people who voted for the Libertarian, but if you're looking for independents, 2% of them said they don't plan to vote at all, which is actually pretty high among sort of traditional and registered and likely voters. But the independents are breaking for Warnock 61% to 36% for Walker. And so, again, it's not a one-to-one, an independent to the persons who voted for the Libertarian, but it does give you some sense that, to your point, Paul, the notion that Libertarians are going to break those folks who voted for the Libertarian are going to break for Walker is not one that you can necessarily bet on here. But things still remain so close. I do think it's interesting that there's such a delta between Warnock and Walker, that the polls still show them largely within the margin of error of each other, if not just slightly ahead here or there. And yet the wisdom of the markets is telling us that Walker basically has no chance. And I'm not totally sure that is the situation necessarily. In Georgia, when you have nothing else really on the ballot to draw people. So the prediction there is that Warnock will win. Although again, I still think that there may be some, if the bet is, somehow a very low Walker showing, I still think it's going to be tight, and you may be able to find a good place to make a little money there, betting that Walker won't do as badly as maybe some folks say, people who read the news and, know that there's just this conga line of scandal that I can't even keep track of anymore, frankly. So let's move on to some big picture topics. There we have 2022 was a big year, but 2023, I don't know. What are we in for, Paul?
Paul, we got you muted, my man.
Sorry.
I think. There we are.
Yeah, there we are. We're back. Yeah, it's not going to be as good as 2022. We can't promise. 2022 was an amazing year because we had so many big national elections. We had the midterms, of course. And then in Britain, that remains the home of political betting, we had the most incredible year ever. 3 prime ministers, two removed quickly, 2 leadership contests, loads of by-elections. So that's not going to happen. But there's still plenty on. So from a national elections point of view, I think we've got 3 that strike me as interesting. Greece, where my long-range tip is a confident tip for the incumbents, New Democracy, who are the mainstream Conservatives. Very confident they will win again, despite some scandals they've got now. I just think they're solid. Spain is interesting, where I think that the incumbent socialists would definitely start favourites, but given the sort of rise of right-wing populism in Southern Europe, it's quite interesting. There's a new party there, Vox, that are doing quite well, so that will be certainly very newsworthy. And then I'm not sure how competitive it is because he might have already rigged the whole system, but Erdogan is up for re-election in Turkey. And, again, inflation over there is insane. I mean, we're talking about inflation of like 8%, 10%. It's like 150 or something in Turkey, right? I was there recently, and basically if you've got dollars or euros or pounds, you're king. That's really all anyone wants to take, right?
Did you buy a house, Paul? With your...
I didn't. I was tempted. Yeah, it's so cheap. But so there could be a problem there for Erdogan, right? And that would be an enormous bit of world news, like big geopolitical implications if that happens. In the States, I mean, obviously we're going to focus on 2024, but to me, the interesting thing is now that we've got the House result at 220 to 215, special elections are now going to be really interesting and really important because the Democrats have only got to gain 3 and they've flipped the House. So I mean, I know that's asking a lot in 1 year to flip 3 special elections, but it could happen in the current state of play for sure. So I think we've got to keep an eye on that. And finally, I'll just get to Britain, where there's a lot going on in Britain at the moment. We could have a general election. It's only a 17% chance, according to the betting. 2024 is 83%. But there's loads of betting already. There was a big election last night, a special election, a by-election, which was a disaster for the Conservatives, an absolute disaster, and a really terrible signal for the new leader, for Rishi Sunak, because the general assumption was that Sunak might be the key to their recovery, that he'd do better than Truss, but he's got no sort of honeymoon whatsoever. And it really looks at the moment like the Conservative Party's in real existential trouble as a consequence. So all of that is interesting. And I mean, no doubt we'll discuss it through the year because there'll be loads and loads of by-elections over the year. Loads of people are standing aside because they don't fancy their chance at the next election.
What about you, Patrick? What are you looking forward to in 2023? I think July is when things start getting crazy.
Yeah, that's what I'm most looking forward to. But I think it's worth noting with and look, I understand probably the majority of our viewers and listeners of the podcast are probably more intrigued by the U.S. election situation, U.S. political situation. But I think it's interesting, and Paul, you can correct me or affirm me or however, if you agree, disagree. But I do think it's interesting that Paul brings up these other races because I kind of correlate them to, in sports betting. Let's say you're betting an NFL game this weekend. Well, the spread on an NFL game, the total on an NFL game, the odds makers, those spreads and totals and the odds for those games, they're airtight because everybody knows the NFL so well and the odds makers are so in tune with the NFL. It's really hard to find advantages. But when you get in sports, when you get into, say, the proposition bet market, like, maybe will a team score more than X number of points or less than X number of points? Or maybe a team is favored by 3, but instead you want to say, you know what? I think that team's really good. I think they'll win by 7. And you can change your bet to win by 7 to get a better payout or just a result that you think is more likely to happen. Some of these alternate markets. And that's what I think these are, that, a lot of these that Paul has pointed out with, like, Greece and Spain and Turkey and what's going on in the UK and so forth. And that there are opportunities there that don't exist. There's potential to find holes in the odds, holes in the trading percentages that don't exist in these big picture, like the presidential nomination, or winning the presidency, or winning the Senate, or winning the House. Those are probably more dialed in based on the volume of betting and the amount of tension it gets and the fact that the odds makers are more tuned in. Whereas some of these kind of down the page markets are ones that can really create opportunity, and you shouldn't overlook them if you engage in this sort of in the political betting activity, if you will.
No, that's an excellent point. People should definitely be looking at these elections and gathering whatever intel they can, because it is, to your point, because there's less volume, maybe there's a little less research on the other side, and you can really get in there. The one thing I'm also looking at in 2023 is how, especially the Republicans, are going to be dealing with this issue of mail ballot voting, because they have effectively demonized mail ballot voting as sort of corruptible and untrustworthy, and the system generally as corruptible and untrustworthy. And I think that if there is an issue in the Georgia runoff, for example, and I think this will highlight the overall issue, where there's so much of the volume is absentee ballot voting or drop-off voting or vote by mail, these things that Republicans have, sort of tarnished in the minds of their supporters, is that going to come back to bite them in terms of the turnout, right? Because if you take away early voting and mail ballot voting, what you end up with is that your supporters now have to do the thing where they go down and stand in line and go to the polls. And that's just an extra step that folks on the other side aren't having to take. And so especially in a close race, anytime you're putting an obstacle in front of your supporters, that is going to be a problem. And so I'm interested to see how this plays out. And when we go forward, if the Republicans change their tune on mail ballot elections and people's need to participate, then you could see a shift in turnout, and you can see a shift maybe in favor of the Republican Party. So for you bettors out there, be on the lookout for the party to change its tone as a result of what is going to be probably a very close election, and one where these absentee ballots, where, if they had been more widely accepted, might have been the difference for the Republican Party. Losing out on that seat in the Senate is going to hurt them and may force that change. So if that happens, then we may see a different kind of turnout going forward, and some sort of flip to what we saw in the midterm election, maybe before the 2024 election and some of these special elections, where you can kind of demonstrate that. But that is a big thing that I think we saw in the midterms, but I think Georgia is actually going to shine a huge spotlight on the importance of making sure your people vote in every way they can. And not to, and that if the downside of demonizing the election process is that it can turn off some of the people whose votes you actually need to show up and participate in it. So that's going to be a big thing to watch. Alrighty, so before we go, let's get some final thoughts and picks of the week from Patrick. We'll start with you.
Well, first off, I think it's great that you pointed that out. If I can just back up one moment on that. I've seen, some very smart people on the conservative ledger, some of them in the media, some of them elsewhere, who are saying exactly what you said. Look, you may not like ballot harvesting, you may not like mail voting, all that stuff. And, I'm not going to express my opinion one way or the other on it. All I can say is what they're saying, and I think is smart, and it's totally to your point, Melissa, is, look, you've got to play on the field that exists. You can't play on a field that doesn't exist, that you wish existed. This is the field that exists. So, and they're saying the right, smart things exactly the way you are. That is, play on the field that exists, do everything that your opponents are doing. If this is what your opponents are doing and it's what's getting them across the finish line, which it is, then you better figure out a way to do it. So, and bettors need to keep, anybody who's going to bet or trade on politics definitely needs to keep an eye on whether there is a tone shift and a strategy shift to do that. Because if there isn't, then your money is better spent on the Democratic Party. I will say that for sure. But big picture, as I kind of alluded to earlier, I think that, a couple things that are interesting to me. First off, I think, it's looking way ahead, and we'll talk more about this in the coming months. And certainly as we get to the middle of the year, when things still, start to heat up for primaries and debates and so forth on the GOP side, at least, that I think DeSantis is the guy. And I think the reason I think DeSantis is the guy is look at all the media that's come out against him in the last couple of weeks. Because if for all the terrible things that people say about Trump, whatever's true and so forth, I don't really care. Trust me, the Democrats would love to run, as bad as 2016 went, they would love to run against Trump again. And it would be to their benefit to run against Trump again. I thoroughly believe that. And that's why all these pieces are now coming up on DeSantis. There was another big one this week that got a lot of play on social media. It's like, DeSantis is the guy the Democrats want to avoid. I have no doubt in my mind about that. And if that weren't the case, you wouldn't be seeing all these pieces in mainstream media, articles, on news shows, on social media, and so on, gaining all this traction. They want no part of him. They want every part of Trump. So I think if DeSantis is not the nominee and Biden runs, then it's going to be a difficult road to hoe for the Democrat, for the GOP again. I think they're going to lose, to be quite honest. And then, as I alluded to earlier, I think there's something to be said for that backtracking that Paul alluded to in Biden being the nominee. I'd like I said, if I could take a yes, no on it right now here in the United States in a legal regulated market, I'd be betting no, for sure. I think it's I don't think it's a slam dunk thing. I just think it's a value play there that Biden doesn't run, and there's a long time for things to change. And you can always, in a long period of time, as Paul has shown with all the advice he's given and all the trading he's talked about doing through Betfair, you have ways to kind of hedge your position when you have a lot of time too. So those are the two big picture things. I think DeSantis has got to be the guy, but if Democrats get their way, Trump will be the guy, and they will love it. And look, and they're right to do it. I'm not saying, maybe you might call it dirty pool or dirty politics, but look, the idea is to win, and it's smart politics to do whatever they can to clear the way for Trump to win the nominee, no matter how much they might say forwardly they don't want this. I don't believe that. I think DeSantis is the guy that needs to get in there.
Paul, what do you think of the movement against Trump? I thought it was interesting. It was only 1% down to 17 over the week, given what, as Patrick is alluding to, Trump is being had a very interesting week. Let's say that. but is all that already baked in, or what? Why isn't the market reacting more strongly, or did they think it doesn't totally matter?
I think there's a whole issue with Trump and the market where the first time anyone had ever thought about Trump as a betting phenomenon was 2016, and he shocks everyone, and people got their fingers burnt. And every single election ever since, he's been overbet. I mean, just as a really extreme example, actually, was the impeachment, the first impeachment, where, it was so obvious that the Democrats were going to impeach him. There was so much material they were going to choose. It was just a case of when. And he was like 15% or something to be impeached. And then even after it broke that they were going to impeach him the next day, he was still 50%. It was like free money, because there's just a mindset amongst a lot of people that he's bomb-proof because he pulled off one upset, right? And he's been overbet every time. I am more convinced by the hour that he's finished, absolutely finished. And if you don't mind tying up money for a while, it's free money opposing him. It really is. Whether it's DeSantis or not, that depends on how quickly they get rid, how quickly he lasts, because he might have the field to himself, or he might end up with a full field. But look at what's happening. I mean, the legal news is just abysmal on every front. The documents cases looks an open and shut case. I think the special prosecutor will go for him. You've got the New York case, which is rounding up at the minute, and his former CFO has turned, Wieselberg. You've got the further New York action against the Trump organization that's probably going to finish them as a business in New York. And then you've got the January 6th committee are going to publish their final report before Christmas, which could well recommend charges. And then you've just got everything else that's going on. I mean, look, I've been going on for years. This is a Russian op. Trump is a Russian op. The people around him are a Russian op, right? There is so much ties. If you look through their careers, go back 40 years, it's plain sight. And it's not just going on there, it's going on in 26 other countries around the world. And look at what happened yesterday. You've got Kanye West, right? You've got a white supremacist in Nick Fuentes and Alex Jones. And they're literally lining up to say, I support Russia more than you do. I support Russia. No, I really support Russia, right? They're just desperately trying to keep the grift going as long as they can. And it's falling apart. I mean, Kanye West has really ruined this for them because his job was to get in there and to split the Democrat vote and the black vote. And instead, he's not meant to come out as a full-on Hitler worshipper, right? And make headlines that way. I just think it's all over. And the mainstream Republican Party don't want anything to do with it anymore. And what you're left with now is these characters like Alex Jones and Fuentes and the Oath Keepers. And I think they're going down. I think that they're finished. And by the middle of the year, we'll either be into a Desantis coronation or a full-on, multifaceted primary, which I hope it's the latter, because that would be a fantastic bet.
And speaking of opportunities to bet, there seem to be maybe some opportunities coming for people in various places to bet on politics. We might have 2023 might see a bit of an expansion or maybe some more opportunities. Patrick, did you want to touch on some developments there in New Jersey?
Well, so first off, I will point out, as we in the run up to the midterms here, that in Ontario, Canada, which just legalized single event sports betting, just went legal this year over the last year, and DraftKings was allowed to offer in Ontario only. I'm not sure why, betting on U.S. politics, which is great. It's a good first step for starters. So I want to reiterate that at least that's going on. Now, there's an interesting new firm in New Jersey called Sport Trade. I believe it's Sport Trade. Let me double check here. Yes, it's Sport Trade. And I believe to a degree, it's much like what Paul alludes to often is Betfair. It's sports trading. You're trading on events rather than betting on events. So you have, this ebb and flow where you can potentially get into and out of trades the way you would trade stocks and such, which is fantastic. It is legal. It is regulated. It is allowed in the state of New Jersey. Now, that's the only place it's allowed so far, but certainly they're going to be looking to expand. And I think this is the kind of development, this type of company doing this type of trading. I think this is hopefully the potential precursor to election betting in the United States, which right now is not allowed. The Federal Trade Commission, it's against Federal Trade Commission rules. But I think there are going to be petitions at some point, especially in the wake of PredictIt getting thrown away, which is, as Paul has alluded to before, is a travesty. And I think there's going to be a petitioning of those rules to see about this. I know there's absolutely interest in it. There are certainly integrity challenges, but as Paul can allude to, the UK has overcome those challenges immensely. And I think UK bettors, they're so consumed with betting on American politics, maybe even more so than their own politics, and they make it work. So I feel like this could be a good first step.
Yeah, do you know, interesting, in addition, that's really interesting, that's happening in New Jersey. Now, there's another thing I heard about called the American Civics Exchange. And I understand they have a loophole where they can act as a broker for people who want to bet on politics with one another. Now, they can't display live odds legally in the way
or trading prices, as it were, right?
Yeah. They can't display the market, but they are setting up, they are brokering bets between interested parties. And I was told the other day of a $20,000 bet that they brokered. And, you know, this is inevitable to me. I mean, I've seen, just with the absence of PredictIt, people I know on Twitter just calling out and saying, you know, who wants to have a $2,000 bet with me on 2024 or on the next UK election, because they're not in the UK and they can't use that. And, you know, this is markets for you, isn't it? You know, punters find a way. They find a way to do these things. And if PredictIt isn't there, we'll just replace it with something else. So the quicker that they can find a way around this and set up a regulated, open alternative, the better.
All right. Well, we will see how that goes. I know that American Civics Exchange is relatively new, so maybe we'll see some more action in 2023. And that is our show for the week. We're going to be back in the new year with some more insights. Thanks to everyone for listening. Do not forget to send us your questions at VegasInsider@bettercollective.com. As a reminder, betting on politics is not permitted in the US and even in some places in Europe. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and we encourage any gamblers out there to check a variety of sources. Have a wonderful holiday season, everyone. We will see you in 2024.